and what might the future be of the conference, and something about the proceedings. This you will want to know, I think. Also deadlines, etc., publication plans. So, some 10 years ago, I had a very annoying experience wanting to report on an initiative in Denmark on developing a math council program. And the people involved, we wrote this up, sent it to, I won't say which journal, but it's the major European journal in math education. And it was simply just kind of rejected with the reason that the time wasn't really anymore to describe implementation efforts. We had surpassed that. We should think of a book chapter. But we were able to find actually a paper like ours in this particular journal, only published back in '75. But using this as an argument, we convinced the editor, and the paper was published. But it made us realize, us and others, that we needed some place to discuss these things about putting research results back into practice, looking at large-scale implementations that are done in relation to math education, teaching and learning, etc. So the first idea that was coined was to have this thematic working group at the European conference. And we applied for this. The idea was accepted. The thematic working group became a reality. And it was held the first time in 2017 in Dublin. And fortunately, interesting people attended the conference or the working group. And they stayed, actually, which is amazing, right, Boris? Almost 10 years, dude. So, yeah. So this has been an initiative that has continued, right, with different leaders of the group, etc. The next one will be in February 27 in Bucharest, if you're interested. At this conference, we also tried to come up with a definition based on the first round of the thematic working group about what we actually saw as being implementation research in mathematics education. I won't read all this stuff to you, but something that encompasses a wide range of different kinds of didactical design, stretching from task design, lesson design, teaching modules and courses to entire programs, aspects of developmental projects, intervention projects, and an equally wide range of formats, as long as the designs of these are explicitly based on and informed by findings from mathematics education research. And then also something related to research on already existing implementations. So we were thinking of this as implementing research back into practice and also doing research on actual implementation. When the group continued, we decided to include replication studies also. At this time, it was actually 2 editorials came out in JRME back when Jennifer Kai was the editor. They had one thematic issue on implementation research, interestingly enough for us, since we were already looking at this. And they had another one related to replication studies. And they had some discussion here about studies that there used not to be so many, but they were seeing that there were actually some in the literature, et cetera, et cetera. And there were some very good comments in these 2 issues, in particular by Schoenfeld on implementation and by John Starr on replication. So we used that in our further work. And some of the references that are given here, Century and Casata and Nielsen, I mean, they are some of the references that also informed some of the first groups at CERMI. Maybe more in 19, right? But still. So in 2018, we began to discuss the possibility of having a journal related to the work that went on in this thematic working group. And as I mentioned, we were inspired by these two thematic issues in JRME. And we started reaching out to international publishing houses. I had some meetings, and eventually we ended up with Brill, which we are today actually quite happy with, to be honest. Probably more happy than we would have been with some of the initial publishing houses we spoke to. Around the same time, there was an idea about having a special issue of ZDM. It was Boris's idea, I think, and we decided that Boris, Morten, and Mario would work with this, and I would work with trying to secure a journal. And everything happened more or less simultaneously, and actually also rubbed on each other in a quite nice way, I think. And you can interrupt if you disagree with it. This is your story as much as mine. So, in 21, the first issue of Irme was published. We have 1 volume per year, 2 issues per volume, 4 papers per issue, along with a long thematic editorial. We were inspired to some extent by these JRME editorials, where we take a topic and discuss it. So the editorials are, we hope, informative. They are not only just a presentation of the papers in the issue, right? They are thematic simply, and I will give you examples later. And each paper has an impact sheet. And the idea of this impact sheet, you will know actually, because it has the headings, the same headings as the abstract you have handed into this conference. And the impact sheet is open access, even though some of the papers are not. They are supposed at least to have an open access impact sheet, and you can read this. The idea was also potentially down the line, maybe to update the impact sheets if things related to the research had developed over the time, if there was an afterlife of implementations or further replications, etc. But that's a lot of work, so let's see how that goes. But the impact sheets are there and available. And actually, last year, Irme was accepted into Scopus, which we at least thought was pretty good. So, some examples of editorials. The first one was on the launching of the journal and what were our intentions, etc. And also kind of summing up what we, at that particular point in time, knew about implementation and replication studies. So it's a good beginning point, actually, if you want to familiarize yourself with this, with these topics. In the next one, actually, we anticipated that we might not get so many replication studies. It has turned out not to be the case. We have replication studies in every issue. We still have more implementation studies, of course. So we thought that maybe we should suggest to people what they could potentially replicate. So that's what happened in the second editorial. Then, due to the close collaboration with the CERMI thematic working group, we decided to have some long editorials based on the work that took place in the group. And sometimes the papers presented there, of course, end up in the journal. So we have 3 of these editorials, and probably, hopefully, we'll have more. Then we have one discussing fidelity in relation to implementation and replication studies. We have one that addresses what happens after implementation, post-implementation, something that Morten thought sounded pretty cool, and probably it does, right? So it's about the afterlife of implementations and framing this implementation research in mathematics education. Then we were so lucky to be, some of us, to be invited to some STEAM summer schools in South Americas. And we used this as an outset for writing an editorial about internationality and what that actually means, and how a lot of the research that we see in the journals are actually often from Europe and often from the US, and what happens with all the research going on in the South Americas, et cetera, and in other places. Then we have a nice editorial about implementability and what that actually means. And again, a Sermi editorial. We have the latest editorial, which is I saw was actually just online on the website this morning, is on this notion of solid findings that came out for some years under the EMS education. What is it, Boris? Mathematics education. Yeah, exactly that. And there are some very nice writings about what are solid findings in mathematics education and how could these potentially be an inspiration for replication. And I think next year there might be an editorial about EMEC 1. It's rather likely, I think. Okay. So what happened in this ZDM issue that I mentioned before was that the guest editors, Boris, Morten, and Mario, did like some initial reviewing of what was in the field and used this to provide us with quite a more elaborate definition of how we could think of implementation research, one that's also somewhat process oriented and too long for me to read. But I recommend that you look in this issue and read the editorial. It's quite informative. So a little bit about the implementation research literature that we now in hindsight often see in the papers that we publish is of course Century and Casata, which is implementation research, finding common ground on what, how, why, where, and who. So this is educational research. It's not related to mathematics education specifically in any way, but it's rather informative. Coburn, the one that was in Linda's workshop, if you read it, about scaling and scale. There's now also a paper where Mario is the first author. You also saw that in Linda's workshop on how to think about this in relation to math education potentially. Roger's old book on diffusion of innovations is also seen often because we are talking about innovations. I think, Boris, you used this already back in 2017. And more recently, Ola and I have also to some extent been using Chen about program theory and how you actually, when you are implementing something, you're also possibly in need of a theory of change. And what is that for you in relation to this particular project? So these things have also become more important and are seen in quite a few of the papers. Just very, very briefly, right? I mean, all of this, of course, comes with a vocabulary. And some of the, just off the top of my head, are innovation, of course. You need to know what is the innovation. So what was the innovation of Algebra Monday? What was actually the innovation to be replicated, or the innovation that Ulysses talked about this morning? I suppose using replication for education purposes, right? Enablers and barriers when implementing something. Stakeholders, we've also had to mention quite a few times, at least in our group. Implementability. Some things are simply more implementable than others. So what is the implementability of a particular theoretical construct with teachers in a given context? Theory of change. How do you measure success of your implementation? Scale and scaling. Upscaling. We haven't had any papers on downscaling implementations actually, but it was a joke. Okay, it's late, I'm sorry. Conceptual replication, Mario talked about this. Replicability, etc., right? So these are some of the words that are often used. We talked this earlier today about using the theoretical vocabulary in your discussions, right? So this is some of the things that often happen in the EMA papers. These are some of the words in the discussions. So a long list of what the type of studies that EMA actually welcomes, right? I'll do this somewhat briefly. Studies that analyze how the results produced in the field of mathematics education research can be implemented into educational practice. Again, this is related to the fact that there's a lot of research just done and it's just living in journals, and no one is actually applying it in the actual teaching and learning of the subject, right? Which is a shame, possibly. And what can we do to sort of assist with that? Studies focused on analyzing and or comparing the functioning and outcomes of actual implementation initiatives, studies investigating mathematics instruction at scale, and studies exploring implementation strategies for scaling up learning initiatives, methodological studies that elucidate the way in which different theories, methods, and tools can be used to develop implementation and replication research, replication studies in which previous research findings, empirical and or theoretical, can be tested for validity, generality, or be explored to find the conditions under which they do or do not hold. Replication studies where previous research findings are reinterpreted using different or new theoretical perspectives to expand our understanding of the original results. And finally, replication studies investigating the effects of a particular educational intervention under different conditions, contexts, or sample populations. We've also seen replication studies that are using technology that was not available when the original study was carried out back in the 60s or 70s, right? So that's another possibility. Questions to the journal. Everything is crystal clear. I look forward to your submissions. Oh, you have a question? Okay.
How long is the time to submit, have an answer or something about?
Yeah, yeah, when will you, yeah. I hope not more than 8 weeks, I hope. But yeah, it can happen that it's a bit longer. But the journal only comes out twice a year, right? So if there's something there that is actually publishable, I mean, it might not be so long, the turnover. Okay. Other questions to the journal? Boris has. Okay, is that positive or?
One, two, three. A group of colleagues I know now submitted a proposal to Springer for edited volume entitled "Where is Mathematics in Your Mathematics Education Research?" So somehow when now you presented vocabulary, and I agree very much that this is a very fair account of our vocabulary in the journal, somehow I didn't see their triangle, function, limit, something. So probably something to think about in our evolution is what exactly specific in our journal is to mathematics.
Well, we don't necessarily publish studies on science education. Or is that the answer you're wanting, or?
Yes and no. Yes, because of course every submission that we receive in the journal is related to mathematics education projects. But when I read, let's say, my own paper, I can ask myself, what would be different in theoretical framework and type of conclusion if I substitute mathematics to history?
Yes.
And sometimes it is difficult for me to answer. And theoretically, we know that epistemology of mathematics is different from epistemologies from other sciences. Like I said, it's just a challenge. I don't know how to answer what I ask.
Yeah. But this is not only an issue for implementation replication studies. It's very rather general. They have been talking about it for decades now, I think, actually. So, yes, okay. Fair enough. More encouraging comments?
No, I was trying to. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. No, let's go.
Okay, just a reply of some sort. I mean, there are like two ways, in a sense, to, well, I guess there are many ways, but two ways, different ways to shape an intellectual arena is with the concepts you use and with the objects you look at, right? And I think we, with the vocabulary you suggest here, which I think is a fair account, we are very open to, in a sense, having concepts, ideas flowing in from outside mathematics education to our way of looking at these problems. I mean, theory of change, it's a general thing, but we use it here in the context of mathematics education, and I think that's fine actually. So we could maybe wish for something to describe phenomenon specifically to mathematics education, but I think it's not on.
I think that Michel Ortiq analyzed or began analyzing this issue in one of her papers published in IRMI.
Yeah, the first
That's-
issue.
Yes, the first issue. She was talked about theories that can inform implementation in our field, and she separated external sources and internal theories. But if we are talking about it, probably this is a good idea to reflect in the next editorial.
Yeah, that could be a good idea. Okay, very good.
I just would like to say that Nicholas Balachev said a paper that he considered that the paper was in mathematical education if there were not mathematics inside.
Yeah, okay. I think in most of our papers there's math somewhere inside. Yes, yes. So, but that's, I think that might also be fair enough. Okay. So we move on to the conference. Excellent. So in the beginning of 2024, the idea for a specialized conference was coined, and what is decided that it should somehow be a working conference, right? That's why we have the presentations in groups where there's time for elaborate discussions. And initially, we also thought there would be time for maybe writing on the papers as part of this. I think maybe that turned out not to be so possible because we're spending the time doing discussions, and that's important for revising the proceedings, right? So, but we can change this hopefully in the future if we want to. Another purpose was, of course, to present to people the ideas of implementation and replication research, and hopefully, you know, foster more papers in this area to IRME or to other journals. That, I mean, you all, of course, decide where you submit. And it was also important when we discussed this the first time round that the conference was not limited to Europe, right? As the thematic working group and IRME is of course limited to Europe, but there are participants from all around the world, of course. But the idea here was to go beyond Europe, right? So Mexico City was a sensible place to begin. Okay, now comes the slide you've been waiting for. I know it. You'll get one more page in the proceedings. You'll get 3 pages. If you have not already addressed aspects of implementation or replication, you can certainly spend that extra page on that. If you submitted more than 3 pages, you will need to cut down and still address aspects of implementation or replication. You don't have to use the theoretical papers and chapters and stuff that I presented here. It's just an idea. You don't have to use the exact same vocabulary. That's not a requirement. But you do have to think about and address how you view your research as either implementation or replication, right? And what are the perspectives related to that specifically for your research reported. And of course, we can only publish papers that were actually presented in the conference. I think that's not an issue, right? We have papers that were not presented. Yeah, okay. No, that's the usual rule. Okay. Submission deadline is December 1st. For the 3 pages, there's no point in waiting because now you know everything. Just go back home and write it on. The submissions will be reviewed by the IPC. If there are issues, we will get back to you. You will have a chance of revising and dealing with this. It's 3 pages, people, right? It's very, very possible. And we are going to help you if needed. And the proceedings will be published primo 2026. Right? By Mario and Apollo. Well, you are somewhat in charge, Apollo, also a little bit, maybe. Pulling threads. Yeah. And I think also we have convinced the keynote speakers to write some papers on their keynotes. They'll have a bit more than 3 pages. And also some 3-page papers on workshops, right? So you will, even though you didn't take a lot of pictures and notes, if there's something, hopefully it will go in the papers, right? Yes? It's the template on the web. And you can use these headings. You can also alter them a bit if it makes sense for you, right? It would be nice that one of them is related to either implementation or application, I think. And if you need inspiration, go and have a look at the impact sheets on the journal website, right? You can have the slides. Yes, excellent. Okay. We hope to organize an EMEC 2 in November of 27. We don't know where. It will be on this planet. And one thing we do know is that the submission deadline will stay the same, namely 15 September. 27, you'll be given 2 pages in the same template. Something is the same, right? But it would be in a different country, I think. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Remember that there is a share folders, a share folder to upload pictures of the conference. If you want to share them, will be very nice to see your pictures. Moren and I, we will do the closing session tomorrow, and we are thinking on selecting some of the